Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, the Taliban say Indian supplied airplanes have bombed and destroyed a hospital in the capital of Helmand province. This comes as fighting between Afghan forces and the Taliban rages around key cities including Herat, Lashkargah and Kandahar. In occupied Kashmir, Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in Pulwama and Bandipora districts. The latest killings come a day after EU lawmakers voiced concern over rising human rights violations in the occupied valley. Meanwhile, Pakistan has welcomed the EU parliamentarians' letter and called it a global censure of Indian brutalities. At least 13 people have been killed and 45 are injured in a terrorist attack in Iraq's Salahuddin province. Local authorities said ISIS militants attacked a funeral at a village near the town of Yathrib. They said the terrorists also targeted a nearby checkpoint, killing 3 policemen. Japan, Thailand and Malaysia have registered a record number of COVID-19 infections, mostly driven by the highly transmissible Delta variant. Earlier, the World Health Organization said the hard-won gains in the fight against COVID-19 are at risk as the Delta variant spreads. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered 65 new deaths and more than 4,900 infections, the highest daily caseload since 29th of April. Globally, the death toll has surpassed 4.2 million, with more than 197 million infections. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, the Taliban say Indian supplied airplanes have bombed a hospital in the capital of Helmand province. In a tweet, a Taliban spokesperson said large parts of the hospital were completely destroyed as a result of the attack. This follows reports that Indian cargo planes delivered a cache of arms to Kabul earlier this month. Meanwhile, fighting between Afghan forces and the Taliban rages around key cities as foreign forces continue to withdraw. Taliban fighters have entered parts of Herat, Lashkargah and Kandahar. In occupied Kashmir, Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in Pulwama and Bandipora districts. Rights activists say the occupying forces have killed at least 400 civilians in the valley since August 2019. Meanwhile, Pakistan has welcomed EU lawmakers' letter on the humanitarian situation in Indian occupied Kashmir. On Friday, 16 parliamentarians urged action against rights violations in a letter to the European Commission. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry's spokesperson said the letter demonstrates global censure of rights violations in the valley. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the UN has discussed the issue at least 3 times, despite New Delhi's fake narrative of normalcy in the valley. For more on this, we have Barrister Taimur Malik, international law expert on Kashmir issues from Dubai. Barrister Malik, thank you for your time at Indus News. First of all, Indian troops martyred 2 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir today. What do you think? What does India want to gain by killing innocent Kashmiris?
It is very unfortunate that these events and incidences continue to take place in the IIOJK. And this is clearly a reflection of India's desire to quell dissent in the local population in Kashmir, and especially as it heads towards the 2nd anniversary of the 5th August changes that it made unilaterally in relation to IIOJK. It wants to ensure that there are no protests in the valley.
Barrister Malik, the EU lawmakers have voiced concern over rising human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Do you think just raising concerns is enough to stop Indian brutalities in the valley?
It certainly isn't enough. We have had examples of Genocide Watch stating that there are enough early signs of a genocide taking place in the illegally Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, as well as the reports by Human Rights Watch and other organizations. The international lawmakers and policymakers need to consider sanctions on India for this to be taken seriously. Merely raising concerns at their meetings is insufficient at this stage. India has been constantly violating international law and various United Nations resolutions in relation to Kashmir in the last few decades now.
So, Barrister Malik, Kashmiris are to mark a second year of the worst siege by the Indian military on the 5th of August. What does international law say about Indian siege of this kind?
Under international law, a siege can be said to have taken place if there's a certain type of isolation of the local population and the territory. There are three types of isolation: physical, psychological, and electronic siege. And in this case, we can say that all three elements exist, and therefore the population and the territory is under siege. The other thing, from an international law point of view, we should say that it's an illegally occupied territory, and under international law, an occupation is a question of fact. Therefore, it doesn't depend that the existence of an occupation is voiced as such by the occupying power or not. It merely requires the situation to meet defined factual criteria in order for it to be classified as an occupation. And therefore, the current situation in IIOJK is an example where there's an occupation by an occupying force. The territory is not Indian territory. There is a hostile army, and India exercises complete authority and effective control over this territory, meeting the criteria for an occupation to be in place. It's an unfortunate situation. The result of all these actions and the 5th August 2019 actions, unilateral actions by India, is primarily to ensure certain demographic changes in the population, which could work to India's benefit in the future. And that's something that's also against international law and international norms, and something that the international community should take notice of, and not just by raising concerns, but by actually passing resolutions and perhaps even imposing sanctions in certain respects on India because of this.
Barrister Taimur Malik, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, at least 13 people have been killed and 45 are injured in a terrorist attack in Iraq's Salahuddin province. Local authorities said ISIS militants attacked a funeral at a village near the town of Yathrib. They said the terrorists also targeted a nearby checkpoint, killing 3 policemen. In a statement, the provincial governor condemned the deadly attack. He said security forces will launch an investigation into the incident to bring the perpetrators to justice. Meanwhile, in a statement, the military confirmed a number of victims but did not provide specific figures. The military said it will provide details once an investigation is complete. And for more on this, we are joined by Mr. Yadgar Ismail, a political analyst, joining us from Iraq. Mr. Ismail, thank you for your time at Indus News. The American troops haven't left Iraq yet. Is it a coincidence that such attacks pick up pace every time there is a conversation about the U.S. exit?
Well, thank you for having me. An excellent question, actually. So, for example, these discussions that were held in Washington, on the withdrawal of the U.S. troops, the combatants, the military forces that fight the forces. Well, there was some understanding between the Iraqi government and the Washington government. But then the issue is whether these insurgent groups in Iraq, even the radicals or the extremist groups, ISIS on one hand, and on the other side, the insurgent groups are happy about that, or even if they believe that the American troops are withdrawing. So this is this issue. Besides, I mean, even it was evident and clear that some of the U.S. forces will remain, but their mission will change reportedly. So what is that mission all about? Is it only training? Is it only about I don't know other tasks? So this is still from the point of view of these groups is doubtful. So the groups like Resistance and others that they call themselves Resistance or Al-Muqawma, they have vowed to continue attacks on the U.S. troops as long as they remain. So as if these negotiations have meant nothing to them. So now all we can do is to see whether the Iraqi government has any influence or control over these groups, or it has the capacity or the capability to fight those groups or protect at least the American troops and international troops until they withdraw by the end of the year.
So, Mr. Ismail, do you think Iraq's military is competent enough to combat such threats at its own?
Well, there's a little bit of a complexity when it comes to the Iraqi troops. You know, to what extent are they capable? I think if they are all sort of have a mutual goal or objective, they are to some extent capable to do so. But then because they are not controlled, nor even under the same umbrella, maybe allegedly they are under the commander-in-chief, but then the prime minister, but then of course they get their influence or their commands from private militia leaders, from private groups. I mean, reportedly there are about over 60 groups. I mean, we are talking about the Iraqi army on one hand, and on the other, we have all these militant groups that are sort of have a religious definition as well. So it's really not easy to combine all these forces and fight the threats. In some cases, the threats are not really mutual. For example, whether we are talking about the southern provinces and then the central provinces and the Kurdish region. So to what extent these can all cooperate and have an understanding? Of course, if they find a mutual ground, they definitely can combat any sort of threat internally, because they don't lack much, in terms of military equipment, in terms of experience, if we are talking about the capability of the military forces, because they have been in battle with ISIS for over 6 years now, and before them other threats. So now the question is whether they can come along or come together. Or perhaps there's the third equation here. If the U.S. withdraws, what will happen? Is it going to be like Afghanistan, or will be there more insurgent groups? So this is also under the scrutiny of the officials and the people in general.
Mr. Ismail, in case there is an uncontrollable surge in terrorist attacks after the U.S. withdrawal, what would be the Iraq's options?
Iraq, again, I mean, it does require, at least under the current circumstances, require some international support and help in terms of perhaps some of the military equipment, some of the training, and also let's not forget the unification of the armed forces. Some of these armed groups or militias that they are called are accused of having regional influence on one hand, and on the other, they do not really have a basic mutual understanding amongst themselves. So that is the issue for Iraqi government. First, to unify those groups is a very, very gigantic, ginormous challenge for the Iraqi government post-U.S. withdrawal. And the other challenge is perhaps even the neo-ISIS may also rise. Let's not forget the fact that these people, specifically in Sunnistan, the Sunni areas, they feel very unrepresented. Even they do not, consider those Sunni representatives of the government their representatives. So they may be quite vulnerable to be manipulated easily by those insurgent groups and by the radicals and even ISIS to sort of, take their ground and take the fight on the government. So even the possibility of a military coup, to what extent the Iraqi government can be capable. Some of the groups think if the issue withdraws, perhaps the issue will be terminated, then the occupiers are out of sight of the country, but then the other groups believe that they are underrepresented, misrepresented, then they should also have their own say. So since the creation of Iraq, the post-colonial Iraq, we have seen many insurgent groups. We can say 0.5 now. The 0.5 insurgent groups, they want to name or reshape Iraq under their own definition of what Iraq should look like. So previously they attacked USA, and after them they attacked the Iraqi government post 2007. Then in the 70s and 60s, the Kurdish insurgent groups, of course, fighting for equality, justice, and then also the 0.1 fought colonialism. Now it is really 0.5. So these groups think that they should reshape Iraq in their own image. So that is the biggest threat now.
Mr. Yadgar Ismail, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, U.S. President Joe Biden says he is hopeful about the Russian-American strategic stability dialogue. He was responding to reporters' queries about the first round of the talks at the White House. Biden gave a thumbs up, saying he is optimistic as Washington and Moscow are in process of working out their differences. The first round of the dialogue between the two sides took place earlier this week in Geneva. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov led their respective delegations. The State Department said the two sides discussed the prospects of establishing new nuclear arms control. The Arab coalition has thwarted a Houthi drone attack on a Saudi commercial ship. In a statement, the coalition said the Iran-backed Houthi militia continues to threaten global shipping lines. The coalition said it has contributed to the safety of the ships transiting the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department said it is concerned over Houthis' continuous refusal to engage in the ceasefire talks. In a statement, the department said Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lendeking, completed his latest visit to the region. It said Lendeking held meetings with the UN, Gulf and Saudi, as well as Yemeni government officials. The statement read the envoy called for an end to fight in Marib and across Yemen. Saudi Arabia has reiterated support for the security of Tunisia. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan made the remarks after meeting with Tunisian President Kais Saied in Tunis. Tunisia is plunged into a political crisis after President Said's move to dismiss the Prime Minister and freeze the parliament. The Saudi prince vowed to back everything to achieve prosperity in the North African country. Meanwhile, Said has rejected the accusations of staging a coup and promised not to become a dictator. This comes as the two Tunisian parliament members were arrested following Said's decision to lift their immunity. Earlier, the largest political bloc in Hada's chief has also warned street mobilization in case of no agreement on parliament's return. Israeli troops have injured more than 400 Palestinian protesters in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Red Crescent said 8 Palestinians were wounded by live fire. The humanitarian organization said most of those injured needed treatment for tear gas inhalation. It said the Israeli troops also fired rubber-coated bullets at Palestinian protesters at 3 sites. Residents in Baita Junction and Sabi Mountain are holding regular demonstrations against the settlements. Earlier, occupying forces shot dead a Palestinian who was attending the funeral of a 12-year-old martyred. Israel has vowed a harsh response over a suspected swarm drone attack on its oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman. A British and Romanian crew members were killed in the attack. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said he told Britain's Foreign Secretary of the need for a tough response to the incident. In a statement, he said the world must not be silent in the face of Iranian terrorism. Meanwhile, UK's Defence Ministry said its headquarters in the region are conducting investigations. Iran has not officially responded to the accusations. However, Iran's state media quoted sources as saying that the attack was retaliation for an Israeli raid on Syria. The U.S. State Department says it has approved a multi-billion-dollar defense deal with Israel. The potential sale of 18 heavy-lift helicopters values at up to $3.4 billion. In a statement, the department reaffirmed Washington's commitment to the security of Israel. It said assisting Tel Aviv in developing and maintaining a strong self-defense capability is vital to the U.S. interests. The package includes engines, navigation systems, weaponry, support equipment, spares, and technical support. Lockheed Martin and General Electric are the prime contractors of the deal. The European Union has adopted a legal framework to impose sanctions on Lebanese officials and entities. Criteria for curbs would include obstructing efforts to form a government, corruption, financial misdeeds, and human rights abuses. In a statement, the EU said listed officials will be subject to a travel ban and asset freeze. It said the bloc is ready to use policy instruments to end the current crisis in Lebanon. Meanwhile, in a tweet, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken hailed the bloc's decision. Blinken said the U.S. supports the formation of a government in Lebanon that is capable of implementing critical reforms. Lebanon has no proper government in almost a year after the devastating Beirut port explosion in August last year. In Myanmar, students have protested against the military junta in Mandalay city ahead of a 6-month anniversary of February 1st coup. The participants said they reject any possibility of talks with the military for a civilian rule. The students waved red and green flags holding placards that read, "There is no negotiating in a blood feud." Meanwhile, a US-based rights group has accused the armed forces of numerous crimes against humanity following the coup. Human Rights Watch said the security forces have killed over 900 civilians and arbitrarily detained several thousand people. In a statement, the group's Asia director, Brad Adams, said the responsible should be brought to justice. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Pakistan, coronavirus has claimed another 65 lives in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death tally has reached 23,360. The ministry registered nearly 5,000 cases overnight, the highest daily toll since the 29th of April. Pakistan's coronavirus positivity rate has jumped over 8% for the first time in over 2 months. There are over 66,000 active cases, while nearly 3,200 people are in critical condition. The country has so far reported over 1,029,000 cases and more than 940,000 recoveries. According to authorities, over 29.6 million vaccine doses have been administered in the country so far. Brazil has reported more than 900 COVID-19 deaths and over 40,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Globally, the death toll has surpassed 4.2 million with more than 197 million infections. More in this report.
The World Health Organization says the hard-won gains in the fight against COVID are at risk as the highly transmissible Delta variant spreads. It said infections increased by 80% over the past 4 weeks in most regions of the world, while deaths in Africa have also risen by 80% over the same period. Meanwhile, a study in the US has found that people who get COVID-19 after vaccinations carry the same amount of the virus as those who are unvaccinated. The US has ramped up efforts to get people vaccinated in the face of a Delta variant-fueled surge. President Joe Biden said more guidelines and more restrictions should be expected in all probability. However, Chile has announced it has vaccinated 80% of its adult population.
Completamos un hito.
We have reached a milestone that we set ourselves to reach a vaccination coverage of 80% for people over 18. This means that less than 5 months after starting massive vaccination in Chile, we have reached 80%, only a month after reaching 80% with first doses.
Meanwhile, the tensions over the COVID-19 origin tracing keep escalating. China has listed 4 things for US to prove itself transparent and responsible. It asked the US to publish the data of its early cases, allow probes into Fort Detrick, over 200 biolabs overseas, and the University of North Carolina. It also called on the US to release the data on second American military athletes who attended World Military Games in Wuhan in 2019.
In order to shift its responsibility in poor COVID-19 response and out of the political motive of smearing and suppressing others, US has been busy with politicization, stigmatization, and turning origin tracing study into its tool. It has made lying, vilifying, and coercing its standard practice without any respect for facts, science, and justice. Such despicable behavior of the US will leave a stain in the history of the humanity's fight against diseases.
Australia, Japan, and the Philippines have tightened curbs yet again over the Delta-driven surge. Over in Africa, the continent's tightest lockdown in Uganda has been eased after 42 days.
Saudi Arabia has invited Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan to the Middle East Green Initiative Summit in October. In a statement, the Prime Minister office said Khan has accepted the invitation. The invitation was formally delivered by the Saudi ambassador Nawaf bin Saeed Ahmad Al Maliki at Khan's office. The PM office said the Saudi initiatives align closely with the Khan's Clean and Green Pakistan and 10 billion tree tsunami projects. It noted the two countries are collaborating closely to develop synergies in their climate change-related strategies. Riyadh aims at cutting carbon emissions by 60% and planting about 50 billion trees. The 128th birth anniversary of Mother-e-Millat Fatima Jinnah is being observed today. She was born on this day in 1893 in Karachi. Fatima Jinnah obtained a dental degree from the University of Calcutta in 1923 and practiced as a dental doctor in Mumbai. She left her profession and stood with her brother, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, for achieving a separate state for Muslims. In 1947, Fatima Jinnah formed the Women's Relief Committee, which became the core for the All Pakistan Women's Association. Fatima Jinnah is still remembered for her passionate support for civil rights and devoted struggle in the Pakistan movement. Heavy rainfall and thunder showers are expected in most parts of the country in the next 12 hours. Met officials predicted isolated heavy falls in northeast Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa during the period. KP authorities say the rains can cause urban floods in Peshawar and landsliding in upper parts and hilly areas. For the capital, Islamabad, the federal government has sought the support of army troops and navy divers. The government says it took the decision in wake of expected floods in the Korang and Sohan rivers due to heavy rains. The weather department forecasts possible rain in several cities of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir as well. At least 20 people have died in road accidents in Afghanistan's Laghman province. Officials say 18 more were injured in the two incidents. Officials said 8 people died after a bus collided with another vehicle in Karghai district's Naranj Bagh village. They said 12 more were killed in another incident in Aziz Khan Kart's village of the same district. Authorities cited the carelessness of the drivers as the cause behind both the mishaps. Turkey says authorities have controlled 57 wildfires while 14 are still burning in the country. Talking to reporters, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said efforts to contain fires are underway. Erdogan said 45 helicopters with at least 5 planes from Russia and the Ukraine were deployed in the effort. He said an investigation into the cause of the blazes continues intensively. More than 70 wildfires have broken out this week, killing at least 4 people and forcing thousands to evacuate. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has expressed solidarity with the government and the people of Turkey. In a tweet, Khan expressed grief on the loss of lives and offered help to Ankara. The U.S. Justice Department has dealt twin setbacks to former President Donald Trump. It ordered the release of Trump's tax records and disclosed a memo showing he urged top officials to declare his election defeat corrupt. The House Oversight and Reforms Committee released the handwritten notes taken by acting deputy attorney in December. In a phone call, Trump had urged Jeffrey Rosen to say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to him. The call was made days before Rosen was appointed an acting attorney general. Meanwhile, the Justice Department asked the Internal Revenue Service to hand over Trump's tax returns to Congress. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi welcomed the move, calling it a matter of national security. The U.S. has imposed fresh sanctions on the Cuban police for suppressing the ongoing anti-government demonstrations. Cubans have been protesting shortages of basic goods, curbs on civil liberties, and the handling of the pandemic. Talking to reporters, President Joe Biden warned of additional punitive measures unless Havana undergoes drastic changes. He said Washington is taking concerted action to bolster the cause of the Cuban people. The U.S. Treasury Department noted the sanctions also target two police force leaders. The curbs freeze their assets in the U.S. and bars Americans from carrying out transactions with them. Meanwhile, Republicans and Democrats in Capitol Hill have urged further measures. Russia has blamed a software glitch for throwing the International Space Station out of control. The Russian space agency Roscosmos said the human inattentiveness could also have been the reason. It said due to the software failure, a direct command was mistakenly implemented to turn on the module's engines for withdrawal. Agency's head, Dmitry Rogozin, said there was also some euphoria after successful docking and everyone got relaxed. He noted work is underway to activate a newly attached NOKA module at the center of the mishap. Jet thrusters on the Russian research module accidentally reignited a few hours after it docked to the space station. It caused the entire station to pitch out of its normal flight position with 7 crew members aboard. A U.S. government watchdog has sided with NASA over its decision to pick a single lunar lander provider. It rejected a protest filed by Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and defense contractor Dynetics Incorporation. The companies challenged the $2.9 billion award to Elon Musk's SpaceX for the lander. They argued that the U.S. Space Agency was required to make multiple awards. However, the Government Accountability Office denied the arguments that NASA acted improperly. In a statement, NASA said the decision will allow establishing a timeline for the first crewed landing on the moon in over 50 years. Meanwhile, Blue Origin said the watchdog was not able to address the issues with NASA's decision due to limited jurisdiction. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. 2 lakes in Argentina's coastal region of Patagonia have turned fluorescent pink due to unexplained phenomena. The environmentalists fear phenomenon was caused by industrial contamination. This report has more.
2 water resources in Argentina's coastal region of Patagonia have turned fluorescent pink, raising questions on government's measures to curb pollution. According to posts circulating on social media, the officials recently uncovered a truck dumping waste in the watershed. The authorities are unaware whether the sudden change in color of the lakes is harmful. The environmentalists are more concerned. The activist Pablo Lara said Pink Lagoon uncovers the lack of treatment of waste dumped in a lake. The officials are investigating the cause and potential damage to the lakes but have yet to arrive at any conclusions.
And other business updates, China's official purchasing managers index has edged down to 50.4 in July. However, the manufacturing PMI has remained above the 50 mark for 17 straight months now. The National Bureau of Statistics attribute the decline to the equipment maintenance period and extreme weather impacts in some areas. The PMI for large enterprises narrowed down by 1.3% from last month, while for small and medium-sized entities slipped by 0.8 percentage points. Meanwhile, the country's non-manufacturing PMI also narrowly edged down to 53.3 in July. A reading above 50 indicates expansion in activities, while a reading below reflects contraction. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.